Hi, Sarah here. Welcome back. First, let's take a moment to appreciate this cloth. This is an astrology themed cloth, so there are the constellations and different associations with the zodiac signs. I bought this cloth because I thought I was going to study astrology as well, and I thought, why not have an actual reference cloth? I haven't studied any astrology yet, and if you watched a certain couple videos of mine, you might know that I might never actually study astrology, so this cloth might just be more for fun and for the reference, for the memes, rather than actually any sort of studying. But I feel like that kind of goes in line with the theme of this video: tarot decks I'd like to study, tarot decks I'd like to deep dive. There are some decks that I find relatively easy to read with, or they don't really require much study because I feel like I can understand them off the bat. I feel like the images, the art, the theme, I already understand. I don't feel the need to study it more deeply. But there are other decks that I would like to do a deeper study on. So let's talk about those decks that I want to do a deeper study on. Before getting into the decks, I want to show my tarot studying so far, how I've been taking tarot notes, kind of explain what my deep diving might look like when I get around to it. This is my only tarot notebook. I don't have any other tarot notebooks or journals. I don't feel like I'm going to need that many. I started this in my first year of studying tarot like 3 years ago. The only thing that exists in this tarot journal, this tarot notebook so far, is just notes on the major and the minor arcana. I printed out the card, the Rider-Waite-Smith card, and taped it in each page here. I went on learntarot.com, which has a whole plethora of meanings for each card. I selected most of the meanings that work for me, and I just wrote them down here. learntarot.com just had the right amount of organization and the right amount of lots of different meanings, variety in meanings that just made sense for me. In the corner here, I also wrote some symbolism, noting down important things to note from the card, what adds to this card having the meaning that it does. That's all I really have in this deck so far, or in this book so far, just major and minor arcana and notes on them. I also have these post-its because I was hoping to add to this in the future, like add examples, but clearly these post-its are all blank, so clearly I have still never gotten around to adding my own examples or other additions to these cards yet. I've also got some notes on the numerology. Here's some keywords for the eights. Here's the suits. Here's a page on numerology. Honestly, I feel like this is all I really need. I don't feel like I need any more definitions or explorations for any of these things. So what would a deep dive actually look like? I debated getting maybe an individual journal for each of these decks that I might deep dive, but honestly, I don't feel like I'm going to need a whole journal for each of them because my study practice just doesn't really work that way. I feel like what I'm going to do for my deep dive is I'm just going to end up putting everything into this journal here. Let's say I allot a certain amount of pages for each deck. Let's say I put all the majors here, majors page 1, majors page 2, wands, cups, swords, pentacles, and that's literally it. Maybe I only need 3 pages? Yeah, only 3 pages for each of the tarot deck study. Maybe I'll have an additional page, so maybe that'll be my first impressions or my intentions with the deck or anything like that. But honestly, I don't really find value in writing down my first impressions or intentions or anything like that. So I feel like because my deep diving idea is relatively minimalist, I can probably fit all the deep dives I want into this book here. And what might a deep dive actually look like, you might ask? So let's pull out a deck as an example. So here's what I'm thinking of doing. I'm probably going to write down ace through 10, as well as the page, queen, king, knight. I'll probably write down 1, maybe 2 little sentences about what the vibe of the card is. But I think that's really it. I think that's all I'm really going to do for the deep dive. I think that's just going to be a pretty simple deep dive. Or a simple reference? That's it. It's basically just making a reference for myself. I think Tarot with Ruby actually did something kind of like that. I think that's the inspiration that I have. What she did is she just made a grid of each card and her own little snippet for each card. So I think that's essentially just what I'm going to do. 10 of Wands. What is a little snippet that I would write related to this 10 of Wands in particular? This door in particular. Just wanted to explain that little deep dive because I feel like sometimes people want to know what exactly does a deep dive entail. We can say deep dive, but what exactly does deep diving look like for each of us? Okay, so let's start off with a couple of mass market decks. This one is the Revelations Tarot by Zach Wong. And this one here is the Vice Versa Tarot. I don't know the author, but both of these have a similar theme, as you'll see very soon. The colors are really, really vibrant. They're really popping on camera here. I've had these decks for a little bit. I've had the Revelations Tarot for a year, and I've had the Vice Versa Tarot for 2, maybe even 3 years at this point. Let's start with the Vice Versa since I've had that one longer. So, upon first glance, this might look like a standard Rider-Waite-Smith deck, right? On first glance. The colors are so pretty. It just looks like a really beautiful deck. A relatively standard deck, honestly, with kind of standard interpretations. However, the real magic of this deck is when you flip it over. Well, bam! Look at this. Each card has a front side and a back side. Ooh, wow, wow. So here's the front of the sun. On the back, we've got the sun possibly in reverse, or just the flip side of the sun. 9 of Pentacles, 6 of Cups. Oh, that's the front side. This is the back side. And you can tell which one's the front and the back because the numbers in the suits are kind of swapped. For the majors, you kind of have to just figure it out which is the front and which is the back. But for that reason alone, I find this deck very worthy of a deep dive. The thing is, I've had this deck for ages, and I've never been able to actually read with it. I've never been able to do very smooth readings with this. I've tried to pull it out for readings. I even tried doing a tarot in practice with it, but as I was going to do some practice readings with it, the images just weren't making sense to me. They just weren't connecting in a way that made me interested in reading. I felt like the images, the messages just weren't as intuitive or as easy to read with as other decks or other images might be. Maybe this is the deck that I won't actually be able to read with regularly. Maybe this is the deck that I just need to study. Kind of similarly to other decks like the Before Tarot or the After Tarot, where maybe they're not really suited for readings, they're just suited more for deep diving and studying and expanding upon the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So yeah, as you can see, these decks are vice versa. So let me show the guidebook real quick too. This is an interesting Empress card. It looks like a very young person for an Empress card. Okay, so here's the guidebook that it comes with. This deck comes in normally a big box. I actually bought the edition without the box, without the book at first, and so I traded it. Or no, I sold it to someone, and then I was able to buy someone else's version of this secondhand. So this has someone else's energy on it, and I hope that infuses my study sessions with some good information. So this guidebook, it shows this side, and it also has a little snippet for that side. So it has snippets in the book for both sides of the deck. Same for the minors, you know, we have this side and that side. It also explains like what it means in a reading as well as just describing what you see in the image. So I feel like in that way, this deck just has a lot to deep dive in and study and get to know. I just want to be at the point where I'm able to use this deck for readings. Again, like I mentioned, I have tried to do readings with it and I've tried to study with it a little bit, but I feel like I need to plan out how specifically I'm going to study with this so that I can make good use of it and I can figure out a way to make it work that works for me. So that is one deck that I want to study or deep dive, the Vice Versa Tarot. And to the other sort of similar mass market deck, we've got the Revelations Tarot by Zach Wong. This deck has a similar theme in that the top half of the card shows the upright meaning and the bottom half of the card, reversed, shows the reversed meaning. Isn't that fascinating? So this deck also is a great candidate for studying and deep diving and really looking at the images more slowly. I just haven't been able to pull this out for any readings yet because I really, really just want to sit and look at the images and appreciate the detail that goes into making the images reversible like this. This one I have not pulled out or attempted to do any readings with because I know that I would like to actually study with it and get to know it really deeply before I do any sorts of readings with it. This feels like a deck that I would want to create some sort of study practice or deep dive or first impressions or just make a good first impression with it before I just jump into doing readings. There are other decks that I have that I would just jump into doing readings with, but this one I definitely want to just really study the images more. I found the images in this deck very overwhelming at first, but I think last year, because I found someone selling a bunch of their decks secondhand, this one caught my eye. I was like, I think I'm ready at this point, like 2 years in my tarot practice, where I'm ready to actually try reading with this deck and try studying it. This deck definitely seems a bit creepy. The faces are not very like welcoming or very easy to look at, but I find that adds a little bit to the esotericness, the mystery of this deck. There's just a certain esoteric feeling that feels like it clicks with me as opposed to other forms of esoteric imagery that I've seen in other decks. Yeah, maybe it gives me a little bit of like cyberpunk vibes. I don't think that's quite the right word. Maybe just something sort of cyber related. Maybe that's why I am a little bit into this deck. Yeah, I don't know, man. The images are just super, super cool. This is the guidebook that it comes with, and got a snippet about the card, reverse meaning, even the images and symbolism. So I feel like this guide is going to be a pretty handy, straightforward, easy read in getting to know this deck. So I feel like these first two decks, Vice Versa and the Revelations, they're going to be relatively straightforward decks to study with. I really just want to study them and feel like I know the imagery like the back of my hand. Another tarot deck that I want to study is the Spectrowhirl Tarot. This one is a little bit between mass market and independent, I feel. The cost of this deck was around $35, so a little bit more than a mass market, or on the high end of mass market, and definitely less than an indie, which goes between 40 to 70 bucks. I can't help but shuffle these. The cards are very small. I guess very small is not really the right word to say because my hands are a little bit larger than many people's, but I find this smaller than an average tarot deck. Like, this is a normal tarot deck size, and this is how the Spectrowhirl is in comparison. The reason why I want to deep dive this one, let me hold the images a little bit closer so you can see. There is so much detail and so many colors in this deck. I remember feeling like this deck was really overwhelming to look at when I saw walkthroughs of it, particularly Tom Benjamin's walkthrough and review. But there was a part of me that just couldn't help but be drawn to these colors and this deck. Okay, let's try that for lighting. I think that's going to work better. Anyway, so I feel like with this deck, once I take a moment to look a little bit closer, to slow down, I find that the images are really cool. This is a deck where I need to be able to look at the images slowly and look at all the details and admire and appreciate the details instead of trying to just lay out 30 cards on a table. If I lay out 30 cards on a table, it's going to easily be really overwhelming because here's what it's going to look like. Let's see. Like, if I were to try to do a reading like this, I would not know what to make of it, heads or tails. But that's only because I don't really know the imagery right now. So that's a reason why I want to deep dive this deck as well. I just really want to study it and really appreciate all the little details that the creator put in this deck. I think that all the colors and all the imagery, there's just so much to dig into here, and I just want to appreciate it. I want to know these images like the back of my hand. So this is another deck that I do plan to study with and deep dive later on, the Spectrowhirl Tarot. Also, seriously, look at the backs. They are just so cool. Rainbow is my favorite color, and this deck is going to be so cool. I feel like once I understand this deck, it's over for y'all. Now, moving on to indie decks, I've got another pairing of decks that I also would like to really study. This is the Naturescapes Tarot and the Tarot of Architectural Objects, both by Tina of Queen of Wands. These are both photographic decks, so the creator just took a bunch of stock photos, or, well, photos that people made available for free use or for commercial use, and she compiled them into a deck. So starting off with the Naturescapes Tarot. This one is all landscapes. A lot of people have said this is a good alternative to the Majestic Earth Tarot, which is all oil painting landscapes as well. So the Naturescapes Tarot is a deck that I would like to deep dive and really study because I feel like there's just a lot of energy and thematic stuff to tap into with each of the images here. I want to be able to study this deck and make my own meanings and associations with this. Tina's decks, they don't have guidebooks. She does have a kind of a reference of where these photos came from, what pictures or what locations these pictures are of, but she doesn't have any guidebook or booklet explaining the meanings. I feel like I don't really need one. I can just develop one myself. So definitely I want to deep dive this deck, just really, really appreciate the imagery, appreciate how beautiful these photographs are. These decks have given me so much appreciation for photographers because these might seem like regular standard photos, but honestly, the fact that these are all nature-y, real photos of our actual Earth, they're not like painted, they're not like staged, like no one put snow on the trees, like we're just capturing our natural landscapes. I think that is really, really cool. So I think that there's a lot of energy that I can kind of feel and find and discover in each of these cards. So I really want to use this deck as a way for me to feel closer to nature and to landscapes and to our Earth. So this is one deck that I want to deep dive, the Naturescapes Tarot. The other deck that I want to deep dive by Tina, Queen of Wands, is the Tarot of Architectural Objects. As you can imagine, these are all architectural objects, all man-made stuff. The suits in this deck correlate to certain architectural objects. So the swords are all windows. The pentacles are stairs, the cups are statues and sculptures, and the wands are all doors. I think that is so, so cool. Similar to the Naturescapes, there's just a lot of energy a lot of vibes that I feel like I could tap into. I feel like I can imagine, I can create stories from these cards. I really appreciate these decks that don't have any people in them, that they're really just featuring the space, because I feel like as much as characters and scenes and figures can convey stories through their actions, I feel like looking at scenery like this can also convey moods and imagery and energy. So I really would love to use this deck, this study, as a way to slow down and again just really appreciate like these imagery, this energy, this imagery, just what this deck has to offer. I think that this is a super unique deck. I have never seen any other architectural object based deck out there. I've seen other nature themed decks, but architecture, man-made sculptures, things like this is a really unique deck. So I really want to get to know this and just learn these images and make it my own. So that's another deck I want to deep dive. Moving to another sort of abstract deck, this is the Inner Dimensions Tarot. I know that this is a very lesser known kind of deck. I've hardly seen anyone talk about it. Even myself, honestly, despite having this for ages. The creator said that even though a lot of these images are Rider-Waite-Smith based, they also wanted to go their own way for a lot of them. The suits in this deck are named by their element rather than the cups wands. So this would be the 4 of, let's say fire is my guess. I need to learn the alchemical symbols better so I can understand what is going on here. This deck also does not feature any faces. It hardly features any animals. I don't think any animals are here either. So this is another deck that just is very spacious. It's on the minimalist side. I really just want to study this and deep dive it and understand what the heck it's saying, because I think this aesthetic, this vibe is so cool. These suit names are so cool. I really just want to figure out what's going on so I can do readings with this and understand where the creator is coming from and hope, just hopefully bring this deck into my normal tarot practice. So this is the Inner Dimensions Tarot. I feel like I've mentioned this in a lot of different videos, and one of these days I'm finally going to mention it in a video where I actually have done the work and I've studied it. But for now, this and all the other times I mentioned it, I still don't know what's going on. So that's that, the Inner Dimensions Tarot. Here's another deck I want to study. It's the Colorful Tears Tarot. So this one was fulfilled on Kickstarter just this year, so this one is a very new release. I've already written a key to help me remember what the suit renamings are, what the court cards renamings are. This is a really cool type of deck. It draws inspiration from like Riot GRRL culture and other things like that. Honestly, I don't really know too much about that, but I do want to study it because I wonder if it would be something that's up my alley. Some of these cards do feel Rider-Waite-Smith based, and other cards feel very out of the ordinary, very, I don't want to say abstract because they're not really abstract. They're just unconventional, I guess. Very unconventional. So this is a deck that I do really want to slow down with and read about and just write my own notes on and figure out what's going on so that, again, I can use this in readings and I can understand what's going on without having to look at the guidebook every single time. There's nothing wrong with looking at the guidebook during readings. I'm just someone who likes the feeling of being very familiar with my decks to the point that I don't need a guidebook every single time, or I don't need a guidebook for every single card that I pull in a reading. So this deck just has some unconventional stuff going on, but I like it. I don't know what's going on, but I really like it. I was actually drawn to this deck because of the name Colorful Tears, and also because of a sticker that I had gotten from the creator from the Kickstarter that was like, I appreciate my tears, or I love my tears, or something like that. I feel like that's just the vibes that I want to embody. Like, even though I cry a lot, even though I might have some feelings sometimes, that's okay. We're going to be like this explorer of tears. We're going to embrace the feels. We're not going to run away from them. We're going to embrace all the feels. We're going to see our tears as colorful and wonderful instead of, something to hinder us or something to make us feel bad about ourselves. So that's the Colorful Tears Tarot. But let me show you the guidebook because, boy, look at this guidebook. How is this so thick? I have never seen an indie deck with a guidebook this thick. Okay, I don't want to say never. The more accurate thing to say is, out of all my other decks, my indie decks, none of them have guidebooks this big. Oh my goodness. There is a lot to dive into right here. This is the Ace of Matches, Ace of Wands. Look at that. There's just a lot of text for each card. So definitely a lot of love and a lot of energy and effort went into this book. So I can just tell already that this deck deserves a deep dive because, boy, I gotta read this book and figure out what's going on, understand what the creator's coming from. So that's another deck I want to deep dive, the Colorful Tears Tarot. And one more tarot deck I want to deep dive is the Seams Tarot, the Southeast Asian Myths and Stories Tarot. I'm a little bit confused at what's going on with this deck because they were printing a second edition like last year, but I don't see that second edition on their Etsy shop anymore. So I wonder if they're either working on another printing or if they're not selling anymore. I'd hate to say that this deck is out of print because it is so new on the market and it deserves to be out there. But yeah, honestly, I can't really find information on where or how or when this deck is being printed anymore. But anyway, the Southeast Asian Myths and Stories Tarot. I mentioned this a couple of times before. I actually brought this with me to Vietnam during my trip earlier this year. This deck has a lot of different stories for each card. I actually did a flip through of this deck earlier this year where I just covered the titles and I flipped through the deck and I tried to guess what the card was based off of the general energy and the vibe of the card without looking at the title. It was pretty fun. I would definitely suggest that kind of exercise for anybody else looking to try to understand a deck. So this deck is a collaborative art deck, so the characters, the stories were all illustrated by different people. What I really like is that the different countries are also cited or in source here in the titles. This deck has a lot of different stories that, frankly, I've never heard of before. Granted, I know more of Chinese myths than I do of Vietnamese or any other Southeast Asian myths because I actually went to Chinese classes after school, so we got to learn about Chinese history and Chinese stories that way. In the Vietnamese classes that I've been to, we hardly learned about Vietnamese stories. And honestly, from other Asian elders, from other Vietnamese elders, I've never heard many Vietnamese stories either. So even the Vietnamese stories here, I barely know of them. I feel like in our society, in our US society, and in general Western society, we don't get much exposure to Southeast Asian culture or stories or anything like that. Typically when people think of Asians, we think of East Asian like China, Japan, Korea. But being Asian is more than just being Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, you know? There's a lot of stories that I really want to dive into and just get to know and enjoy and appreciate here. I will say, I've actually started reading this PDF guidebook. Every deck came with the PDF version of the guidebook, so I have started reading with it on a Kindle that I just got earlier this year. Unfortunately, what I'm finding from the guidebook is that it's a little bit difficult to read. So here's the excerpt for the Three of Swords. We've got the Three of Swords, the artist, we've got the source, the legend that this art comes from. It explains the tale, it kind of shares a story, but I feel like this deck or this guidebook could have done with a little bit more organization. I feel like this was really hard to cram all this information into such a narrow guidebook. I feel like this format just makes these stories a little bit hard to read. I almost wish that there were like subheadings here that were like the story and the reading or the meaning. I mean, I understand that everyone had limited resources and this is already a lot of work to have put all this information into one book. I'm just saying there could be a little bit more organization here. Another thing is that I find these excerpts a little bit inconsistent in their lengths. I find that some stories are really long and others are just really short. Just wish that maybe there could have been like better copywriting or better proofreading. I also just feel like there's a decent amount of typos in here, like spelling typos, grammar typos, run-on sentences. Sometimes these stories are a little bit hard to read because I feel like they're not as proofread as best as they could be. But again, I do understand like a lot of work already went into it. It might have been hard to proofread every single story, like nitpick every single story. I'm just saying that there's just a lot of barriers that keep me from wanting to dive more deeply in this deck. But I do know I still want to keep this deck. I want to study it. I want to make it my own. I want to figure out some way to work with it in a way that actually works for me. So the Seams Tarot, still on my to study list one of these days. One more deck that I forgot, so adding this in later. This is the Flow Tarot, another photographic deck. Photographs as in, again, stock photos or using photos that people have allowed to be used for commercial use. So this is another photographic deck of nature, similar to the Naturescapes Tarot and the Tarot of Architectural Objects. What's really cool about this deck is that it is all based around the water element. The suits have been renamed. We got swords is snow. We got cups is clouds. Waves is wands. And pawns is pentacles. The alliteration there is pretty cool. Anyway, so this deck is all themed about water, you know, showing the different forms of water, the different ways that water affects our earth, flows through our earth, the different wonders of water as well. I just find this deck so fascinating to look at and to think about. The keywords in this deck are really good as well, like 5 of waves, 5 of wands, flow around adversity. I just think that makes so much sense. And the keywords just fit with the photos so well as the tarot words. So I feel like there's just a lot to dive into here. Similar to the other nature decks I showed, I just really want to dive in and I just want to get to know these images really well, make them a part of my tarot study, learn these images, make my own meanings and my own little study guide for it. That's really the whole point of deep diving these decks, just making my own kind of study guide for these decks and adding them to my tarot arsenal, my tarot knowledge. And also the guidebook for this deck is really good, really helpful. I actually am using this deck as part of my Wheel of the Year spread. So every month I'm actually choosing a different card to highlight and to read about and to focus on for the month. So the guidebook, I find the messages in here just really helpful as well. We've got an explanation of what the card is depicting, a little explanation of what the tarot card means, and most importantly, a little affirmation according to this card. So I just feel like this guidebook, it's just really good. It is one of the most concise and helpful and informational and also affirming guidebooks that I've ever seen. So I think this deck is going to be a really fun deck to deep dive with. And yeah, so that is the Flow Tarot. So that was a quick look at the tarot decks that I want to study and do a deep dive of. Honestly, sometimes in the past when people have talked about deep diving a deck or really getting to study a tarot deck, a part of me has wondered before, like, what is the point? Why would you do this when there are maybe other important things to do? But since then, I've kind of changed my mind because knowing that these are decks that I want to study, first of all, that kind of curriculum makes it unique to me, right? Because this is not a curriculum that just anybody can sign up for. This is a curriculum that is unique to me. I chose these decks. These decks speak to me. I want to be the one to deep dive them and make them a part of my history, make them a part of my study. I think that is why I want to deep dive these and just why I have a collection of decks to deep dive in general. These are just decks that I want to study. I want to feel proud knowing that I've added this to my experience in tarot, that I did a study with this. I guess it just comes down to my motivations and reasons for doing this studying. I'm studying these decks for my own use, for my own benefit. Like, it's not about bragging that I've studied so many decks or I've deep dove so many decks. It's just more knowing that I set my mind to something and I finished it and I followed through with it. And honestly, I don't think these decks are requiring a lot of me to study. It just takes a little bit of time and energy and some brain thinking. So yeah, that's why I want to deep dive these decks. I don't plan on making this like an actual syllabus. Like, I don't plan on designating a deck per month or anything because I like having freedom to change my mind, to just go with whatever deck I feel like instead of planning that stuff in advance. I love that this topic is making the rounds because I love seeing what other people are interested in studying, what really scratches the itch for other people's brains. I'm curious to know if you're interested in studying or deep diving any of these decks. Maybe we can do a little bit of a study buddy, exchange notes, anything like that. I know that some people have deck study groups and things like that going on. I don't think a study group would actually work for me because, again, I just like having the freedom to study whenever and however I feel like instead of being bound to a group that maybe likes to start and end at a certain time. But who knows, maybe I just haven't found the right group of people yet to study with. So yeah, if you're interested in studying any of these decks as well, let me know. Maybe we can get something going together. So hopefully next time you hear about these decks on camera, it's because I've talked about all the ways I've studied them and the ways that I've absorbed their information into my brain. That's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Bye!